Hello, church. Hope you're doing well. Hope everything was going well with you. Everything's going well with us. I know many of y'all have asked how we're doing. We're doing fine. We want to get out and to be able to see you all as much as you all want to get out and be with each other at church once again. So we can't wait to worship with you together, and hopefully seeing me on the screen will be a temporary thing and will end very soon. But we wanted to keep everyone safe. We want to make sure that we do this as safe as possible, and we do what's best in the interest, both spiritually and physically, for our members. And so, kind of on that topic, we've been talking about joy according to the Apostle Paul. And this is a subject that many of you, several of you, have talked to me about with the current distress that we have on us, this pandemic and the quarantine and everything else that goes with it. How can I have joy in all this? How can I maintain a joy when things in life are not going how I want it? I'm not getting to do the things I wanted, the things I had planned. I haven't been able to see my family or particular friends in a very long time. I may have gotten laid off from a job, or I had my hours cut back, or some other thing like that. Or maybe it's just I haven't been able to see anyone in a very long time. I haven't seen friends. I haven't been able to socialize. How do I keep my spirits up, and how do I have joy in this messed up world? And really, that's what Paul is talking about in the book of Philippians. How to have joy in this messed up world. And he gives a step-by-step plan in the book of Philippians. Last week, we looked at the first mindset we need to have. Remember, happiness is what happens to us. It's the effects and consequences of the events that happen in our life. But joy is a mindset, and we can control our mindsets. And we have these mindsets in our life, then we can always have joy. And the first mindset we need to have is to be single-minded. And we looked at that last week, and how we need to constantly be focused on the goal, focus on Christ and his service, and how we can get as many people in the kingdom and as we can. And so that is part of our goal, is to be single-minded, and that allows us to do what we need to do on this earth in our job. And so to have joy, we need to be single-minded. This brings us peace. This brings us clarity in our life, and we know where we're going and our purpose in life. And that brings us a lot of joy. The second mindset that we need to have, and the one we'll be talking about today, is having a selfless mindset. And this is talked about in chapter 2 of Philippians. So if you have your Bibles, I welcome you to join me in chapter 2. I'll have most of the scriptures up on the screen, but it's just good to see it in your own Bible too. And we'll look at how to have a selfless mindset. Here's how kind of the chapter is broken down. In verses 1 through 4, you kind of look at how Paul's commanded the church to be selfless, and particularly selfless among the other brethren, and selfless among the people in the church. And then he gives the example of Christ and how we need to emulate Christ, and how Christ was humble and selfless. And then he talks about another command to not only be selfless in the church with your brethren, but also in the world as you're in the world, and showing that humility towards God, and sacrificing your will for the will of others. And then finally, he follows that up with examples of selflessness. He's going to use his own self as an example, and then Timothy, and then Epaphroditus. And so this is kind of going to be our outline for what we're going to talk about. So how can we have a selfless mindset? This is what gives us joy. How can we have that? And one of the things that I would look at is that we need to be selfless in the church. If we can't be selfless in the church and give others deferment over ourselves, how are we expect to do that in the world? And if you look at the benefits that come with that, that are laid out in verse 1, and so if you look at the bottom of the screen, So if there's any encouragement in Christ, any comfort for love, any participation in the Spirit, any affection and sympathy. And so he basically lays out the benefits that are going to come from the following. So if there's any of these things, you have encouragement in Christ, you have comfort from love, participation in the Spirit, you have affection, and you have sympathy. These are great things. These are great spiritual blessings you have. And he says, if you do the following, what I'm about to lay out, this is what you will have, the benefits you'll have. And if I could tell you, hey, there's a church that is so encouraging. Just every time you go there and you're part of the worship service, anytime you're around them, they're just so encouraging. They're encouraging in Christ. And they really build you up. And not only that, but they comfort you. And they comfort you from love. You can tell they really care about you. And they want what's best for you. And so they comfort you. And then not only that, when you're with them, you feel like you're participating. You're part of movement. You're part of something. And you're part of the Spirit working on this world. And not only that, they're very affectionate. And they love you. And they love to be around you. And then they also show you sympathy. And they really want to do what is best for you. If I told you there was a church like that, wouldn't you want to be a part of it? And what Paul says is you can have all these benefits if you do the following. Verse 2. Complete my joy, brethren, by being of the same mind, having the same love, being in full accord in one mind. So how do you get all those benefits? By being the same mind, the same love, in full accord in one mind. And basically those four different phrases are all kind of hitting the same thing. Be unified. Have unity in the church. And you will have all these benefits. And if you've ever been part of a church that has had unity, you know the blessing it is. And if you've been especially in a church that has not, you know the blessing that unity is. Unity is a great blessing. And it's not just being of the same mind. He tells you what he wants you to be in. And so verses 3 and 4 tells you what that same mind should look like, that same love should look like, the full accord, the one mind should look like. What does this look like? And so in Philippians 3 and 4, he says, do nothing from selfish ambition or conceit, but in humility count others more significant than yourselves. Let each of you look not only to his own interest, but to the interest of others. Okay, what does this one mind, this one love look like? Well, it looks like no individual, no member of the church is looking out for themselves. They don't have selfish ambition. They're not trying to get theirs. They don't have conceit. They don't think of themselves as the greatest in the church, that they need to be in charge and they need to take over. Instead, they're humble. And instead of thinking that everyone owes them, everything is owed to them, they count others more significant than themselves. They think that they are greater and they should get all the blessings and the good things in life. And then I think verse 4 is especially key. It says, let each of you look not only to his own interest, but the interest of others. Instead of looking what I personally want and what I want out of life, and I have to make sure I cut out my slice of the pie before anyone else gets it because that's what I need. Instead, you look at to the interest of others. And if everyone is doing this, everyone in the church is doing this, everyone is selfless and has this mindset of selflessness and is not looking towards their own interests, will your interests be looked after? Yeah. Because if I'm looking out for the interest of others and they're looking out for the interest of everyone else, then they will also look at the interest of me. And so no one will have their neglect anything. They will not be neglected anything. But we'll all look after each other and make sure everyone else gets their part and what they need. And what will happen is we'll have a buildup of love. We will have all these blessings that we had on that previous slide. But we only get there if we're humble. We're not looking out for ourselves. We look at other people more significant than ourselves, and we look at the interest of others, not just ourselves. And then he follows this up with a really strong testimony, a really strong sense of encouragement. And there's in verses 5 through 11, he gives the examples of Christ and what that should look like. And so verses 5 through 11, have this mind among yourselves, which is yours in Christ, who, though he was in the form of God, did not count equality with God a thing to be grasped, but emptied himself by taking the form of a servant, being born in the likeness of men, being found in human form. He humbled himself, becoming obedient to the point of death, even death on the cross. Therefore, God has highly exalted him, bestowed on him the name above every name, so that at the name of Jesus, every knee should bow, in heaven and on earth and under the earth. And every tongue should confess that Jesus Christ is Lord, in the glory of God the Father. What Jesus is saying, what God is saying, what Paul is saying here, is I'm not asking you to do anything that I haven't already done. Jesus has called us to be selfless, but that's because he has already done it. He showed that in his life. He showed that in coming to the earth as in the first place. He in verse 6, he said he did not count, though he was in the form of God, did not count equality with God a thing to be grasped. And he didn't think, he was God, like literally God. That's who he was. And he had all the power and all the recognition and all the authority given to him and everything that comes with that. And he didn't see all of that as something to be held on to grasp, to hold no matter what. Instead, he let that go. He emptied himself. And he took a lowly form, not even just being a man, but a lowly man. A very lowly man. And not just a lowly man, a servant, washing his disciples' feet, constantly looking out for other people, constantly serving and healing and teaching like he did. But not only being a man, not only being a servant, he humbled himself to becoming obedient to the point of death, even death on the cross, a death that was heinous, that was so humiliating that Romans would not allow their own citizens, no matter what they did, to be killed like that. So he has such humility, and he has such a selfless mindset that he would go through literally anything because he loved us. And what ended up happening was God exalted his name, and so that every knee should bow and every tongue should confess that Jesus is Lord. And people say, that's why he did it. He did it for the recognition. That's why Jesus went all through this. Is he just wanted to every knee to bow to him and every tongue to confess that he's Lord and God, which is utterly ridiculous because he was already God. He didn't come to earth and suffer to be a man, a human being. He didn't suffer to become a servant. He didn't suffer to die on a cross just to become a bigger God. That's not what happened. He humbled himself because he loved us. And he humbled himself because he has a selfless mindset. And what Paul is saying is you should do the same. And we should do the same. And there's a parallelism where if we do the same and go to the same lengths that Jesus did on this earth, and we follow his example, the same thing will happen to us in his exaltation, where we will be exalted, and we will be bestowed a name that's above every name. We'll become Christ followers, disciples of him. And we will become in his throne room, and we'll see him forever. We will be exalted too. There's a passage in Hebrews that said, though we are now a little bit lower than the angels, we will be exalted above them. Eventually we'll get there. We will be exalted. But we have to be selfless now. We have to follow the example of Christ. And then this is followed with the command to be selfless in the world. And that's probably I couldn't find a great way to phrase it. but it's a command to be not following your own will. Because if you look at this section, verses 12 through 15, he talks about a few different aspects of it, but it all comes down to humility and letting God have your way in your life. Verse 12, therefore, my beloved, as you've always obeyed, so now, not only as in my presence, but much more in my absence. Work out your own salvation with fear and trembling. For it's God who works in you both to will and to work for his good pleasure. Do all things without grumbling or disputing, that you may be blameless and innocent children of God without blemish, in the midst of a crooked and twisted generation, among whom you shine as lights in the world, holding fast the word of life. And what I think he's doing here is he's saying, you see how Jesus didn't look for his own interest. He didn't look for his own interest. Instead, he looked out for the interest of us. And what you need to do is not look out for your own interest and what and how to get ahead in this life. Because if you ask most of the people in this world, what is your will? What is your pleasure? Do you work for the will and the pleasure of yourself, or do you work for the will and the pleasure of others? And I'd say that most people work for the will and the pleasure of themselves. They don't care about others. And what he says in verse 13 is that for God who works in you both to will and to work for his good pleasure. Not yours. His good pleasure. He works in you for his good pleasure. And I think that we need to understand that, because it's not about us. It's not about our good pleasure. How do we work for our will and our work and our good pleasure? Instead, it's his good pleasure. And so it's a focus. It's not it kind of goes back to that single-mindedness, and these all are connected in some way. If we are single-minded and we're thinking about his will and his work and how we can work for his good pleasure, we will already be on the path of selfless-minded, because we'll look to the interest of God and his people, not for our own. And I think that's what leads into that next paragraph. Because if you look at the end, I won't work backwards through verse 15 to verse 14. So at the end of it, it says, shine as lights in the world. Okay, how do you shine as lights in the world? Well, look at the next sentence. Be blameless, innocent, children of God without blemish in the midst of a crooked and twisted generation. So how do you shine as lights in the world? Well, you're blameless and you're innocent. You're a different kind of person. Everyone else is crooked and twisted in this generation, but you're blameless and innocent, and you're a child of God. Well, how do you show that? How do you show that? Well, work back again into verse 14. Do all things without grumbling or disputing. If you want to shine as lights in the world, you want to be separate. You want to look as blameless. You want to look at like a child of God. You want to set you apart from the rest of the world. How you do that is you do all things without grumbling or disputing. Not some things, not most things, all things without grumbling or disputing. Now, that is very interesting to me. Because if you looked at me and said, how do you shine as light in the world, not grumbling or disputing is not usually what comes to mind. But doesn't that make sense? When something happens, how many people complain about it? How many people have complained about the current pandemic or quarantine or literally anything that's happened? The administration, how they mishandled it, or how everyone's attacking the administration, or whatever it is. How many people grumble or complain or dispute? And why do they do that? Because they're looking out for their own interests. They're not having a selfless mindset. What do you grumble about? Well, I didn't get to go outside. Well, I didn't get to have the food I wanted. Or I didn't, it's kind of the people in Israel in the wilderness. Well, I didn't get any water. Well, you got water. Here's water. Well, I didn't get food. Well, here's food. Well, it's not the kind of food I want. I want meat. Okay, here's meat. It's like grumble, 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 grumble. Do all things with grumbling, without grumbling. Most people do all things with grumbling. Or is it with disputing? If you're disputing, you're not looking out for other people. You're looking out for yourself. No, that's mine. That's mine. You owe me that. You're disputing what you want. And so to grumble or dispute, you're looking out for your own interest. You're not looking out for the interest of others. You're not following the example of Christ. And you don't have this selfless mindset that gives you joy. And because of that, you're not going to look like blameless and innocent children of God. You're going to blend in with the rest of the crooked and twistedness of the world. And you're not going to shine as lights in the world. It all goes down to having a selfless mindset. And that's the only way you can do that, is you need to have a selfless mindset, which kind of leads into the last section, which is the examples of selflessness. He gives 3 examples, and I think inadvertently he gives himself. Now, there's a lot of verses there, so I don't want to read it all, but I want to just kind of give you some highlights of what each person did. So in the verse 16 through verse 18 of Paul, in verse 17, he says, even if I'm poured out as a drink offering upon the sacrificial offering of your faith, I am glad and rejoice in you. Likewise, we should also be glad and rejoice with me. He's saying, if I am to be poured out, if all I have and everything I do is to be poured out as a drink offering, I'm totally empty of myself. I have no more energy. I have no more life. I have no more health. I have nothing in this world. And if for that purpose, the end purpose is that you are helped, that you have better faith, it is worth it. Now, is Paul looking out for his own interest? No, he's looking out for the interest of others. Constantly looking out for the interest of others. He doesn't care about himself. He says, I can be poured out. I can have nothing left. But if you are helped, it's all worth it. He had a selfless mindset. And then you go to Timothy. In verse 19 through verse 24, he talks about how Timothy, there's no one like him. And how, verse 20, who will be genuinely concerned about your welfare. For they all seek their own interest. Talk about other people, but not those of Jesus Christ. Verse 22, but you know Timothy's proven worth, how he's a son with a father and served with me as a gospel. I hope, therefore, to send him soon, so I'll see how he goes with me. So he's saying, there's other people that I know that don't look out for the interest of you, that don't look out for the interest of Christ. Timothy's not that guy. Timothy always looks out for you, and how he there's no one like him. I have nothing like him. I have no one that shares my concern and selfless mindset like Timothy, and how he just wants to do what is in the best interest of you and of God. And then he talks about Epaphroditus, who is his fellow worker. And Epaphroditus is very interesting. If you ever time, you may want to look him up, because he is kind of one of those background guys. He's mentioned a lot in the letters, that like the in greed thing. At the end, he say, Epaphroditus send you welcome, or greet Epaphroditus. He's always at the end. He's always doing a lot of background work. But here he kind of gets a highlight. Epaphroditus, he says that he, at one point, he was bringing what many people thought was some money, and that the Philippians had sent. And he said, this money needs to get there so bad that even when he felt ill, he felt sick, and he was almost deathly ill, he kept going on. He kept going on and pushing himself. Instead of taking time for himself and looking out for his own personal health, which may have been wise in that situation, instead he kept pushing off to the point that he almost died from it. Because he didn't look out for his own interest, he looked out for the interest of others. He had a selfless mindset. And Paul says that's what you need to have. Have a selfless mindset, and you will follow the examples of Epaphroditus, Timothy, of Paul, and of Christ. And that's how you become the light of the world as well. Having a selfless mindset. Now, the final thing that I kind of want to talk about at the very end is how does having a selfless mindset bring us joy? Because we talked about how to have a selfless mindset. We talked about examples of people having a selfless mindset, how we need to do it. But how does that translate in bringing us joy? I just want to suggest 3 points. One, it brings us unity with brethren. Selflessness is one of those things that is very, it can be very, what's the word, addicting. It can take over. It can just, if someone starts getting it, it can just catch on. When you're selfless and you help someone else and you're not looking out for your own interest, but you're looking out for the interest of others, and other people in the church see that, it's catching, and they want to do the same. And if you've ever been part of a church that does this very, very well, or you've known of people, maybe of families that have done this very well, it can just transform a congregation. Where a family over here has saved up for a long time so that they could buy another member of that congregation the car that they desperately need, and then over here this group is going out to the nursing homes every week just to sit and talk with people, and then this group over here, they're traveling around and meeting all the people who are stuck indoors, and then this group over here is getting together and working at the church and trying to make that better, and this group over here is working with people outside of the church and trying to bring other people and be the light of the world. When you have everyone doing that and you hear of everyone working and everyone being selfless and working out like they should, it catches. And what happens is it brings everyone closer together and has unity. And unity within the brethren, within the church, is one of the greatest joys you can have. Because you get to be with your friends, and your friends who you know care about each other. Your brothers and sisters in Christ who care about you more than anyone else, maybe your own family. And that is a great comfort, and that is a great joy to have. That is something that nothing can take away. That things like a pandemic or a quarantine or even a major catastrophe can happen, but you know that there are people in your community, inside of your church, that really care about it. And that's a joy. It's a joy beyond comprehension. That's a joy of being selfless in a church and having that congregation all be selfless. So that's one. Two, our focus becomes outward. If I asked you, when were you the most joyful, most happy even in your time of life? Was it when you were solely focused on yourself, or when you were focused on others? You see, when we focus on ourselves and everything becomes about us, and we focus about our problems and what has happened to us, it's very easy to feel down, to feel like everything's going wrong, to feel like it's not how it should be. And when that's not how it really should be, our focus needs to be outward. Because when we make it all about us, it's very easy to become depressed, come down, to not find the positives in life, but instead to find the negatives. And I've seen this a little bit when people have either a major injury or maybe you're just getting older and have more problems. A lot of it becomes focused on their health, and that's what they talk about, and that's what they know. And really, that's part of it, and you need to talk about those things. But your focus needs to be outward. It needs to be outward. It needs to be focusing on other people. Because some of the people that I have found the happiest is not because they were in a great situation, but instead, no matter what happened, when they lost their legs, when they became paralyzed, they didn't focus on themselves. They didn't say, poor is me, woe is me, depressed is me. They instead said, how can I help others? And it became some of the most joyful people because of that. because we have something in us, and I think it's a God thing, that we have joy when we help other people. We have joy when we love on other people, because that's that God image in us. That's part of his being in us. And for us to have joy in this world, we must focus on other people and serve other people and become like other people. And then finally, we must fulfill the example of Christ. So a selfless mindset brings us joy because we become the full fulfillment of the example of Christ. This is the end. We can become like Christ in this way. And have you ever wondered how, Paul, how Silas, how Peter, how John, when they're beaten, when they're put in prison, how they can, after all that, be praying and singing praises and saying how joyful they were? It's because they know that they're fulfilling their purpose, that they had been counted worthy of suffering on his behalf. And that's something that we need to see. We need to do the same as Christ did. Christ had such humility and counted everything that he had to be lost so that he could give us salvation. And we need to give up anything that we have in our lives to follow the example of Christ and other people like Epaphroditus and Timothy and Paul. Give up everything we have so that we can help other people. And we'll fulfill the example that Christ gave for us. We'll fulfill the purpose that we have for being on this earth. And when we fulfill the purpose we have for being on this earth, that brings us joy. That brings us joy. And so a selfless mindset brings us joy because we have unity with our brethren, where our interests are taken care of because other people are looking out for our interests. We have that love. We have our selfless mindset brings us joy because our focus becomes outward. We're not looking out for our own interests, but we're looking outward. We're looking towards other people, how we can help them. And then finally, our selfless mindset brings us joy because it fulfills the example Christ gave us and other great men gave us. We can become like Christ in that way. And eventually one day we'll meet our reward. And we'll be with him forever in heaven. And oh, what a day that will be. And so for us to have joy, we must be single-minded. And we must have a selfless mindset. To have joy, according to the Apostle Paul, we must be single-minded and have a selfless mindset. If we do those two things, we will have joy, according to the Apostle Paul. I hope you implement these things. And maybe something that to think about, a thought to leave you with, is how have you been doing with those two things this week? It's very easy to have a very selfish mindset, especially during a time of crisis, to think about yourself. But in this time of this quarantine, in this time of the virus, have you been looking out for your own interests? What do I need? What I need to stock up with? Do I have to make sure I have all the TP or whatever that is? Or have you been considerate of others? Hey, I bet this person, I bet she's really lonely right now. She's all by herself. I need to make sure that she's taken care of. Oh, this person, I need to make sure he may not be able to get out. I need to make sure he has what he needs. I bet he needs just a word of encouragement. I bet she needs just a phone call. Whatever that is. Looking out for their interests and not just your own. Instead of wondering why no one else is called or why no one cares about you, maybe you need to take that first step to look at other people and maybe how you can help those other people. And if we do that and we look at the interest of others and we have a single mindset on God's things and we have a selfless mindset, then we'll have joy according to the Apostle Paul. And that's something that can never be taken away.